Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This congregation does incredible work, both in the extent of its work and the depth of its work. And those of us who are a part of that are very proud of our congregation. We're grateful to a wonderful group of lay leaders who work so hard and congregants who are part of this. We're very grateful for a fantastic professional staff, all of whom work beyond the call of duty. And we're also grateful for those who support these programs that we do. And so it's not only a professional staff that leads the programming, but we have resources that come from outside the congregation. Whether it be in our adult education program, our authors series, or our scholars in residence series, which has brought to B'nai Torah over the years the leading scholars amongst the Jewish people throughout the world, and true leaders in the Jewish world also. Today's scholar in residence is Dr. Arnold Eisen, Chancellor Emeritus of the Jewish Theological Seminary. His presence here has been made possible through a gift that is in memory of Harold Smith, given by his family. His son, Rabbi Mitchell Smith, is here with us this morning. Harold and his wife were extraordinary supporters of just about everything Jewish, and particularly aspects of Jewish education and Jewish summer camping in Minneapolis. And so we're grateful, Mitch, to your whole family. Where's Mitch? I saw him somewhere. Yeah, we're grateful to all of you. A word about our scholar in residence, who in this congregation does not really need an introduction. For Arnie's been here many, many times. He is a teacher, and he is also a friend. He's one of the world's leading authorities on American Judaism. Arnie really played the most significant role in bringing JTS into the 21st century. Many think of the Jewish Theological Seminary as a rabbinical school, but we know that it's much more than that. It is an institute of advanced learning, with both an undergraduate college and many departments in the graduate school. And those departments have been tremendously enriched by the work that Dr. Eisen brought. I'm proud to be able to welcome him once again to B'nai Torah. Arnie, please.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's so good to be back here. I have to say that in my 13 years as Chancellor of JTS, some of my happiest moments were my visits to B'nai Torah. And now that I'm not Chancellor of JTS, it's a real privilege and a real joy to be able to be here again and speak to you about what I'm doing now. So the project I undertook when I stopped being Chancellor, aside from becoming a full-time member of the JTS faculty, which is what I am now, is I decided that it was about time that I figured out what my own personal theology was. After, almost half a century of teaching people my field, which is modern Jewish thought, especially contemporary American Jewish thought, I hadn't yet taken the time and effort and courage to sit down and figure out what this American Jew thought, what one American Jew thought about God and faith and all the big questions. And I think I was avoiding the question a little bit because I didn't know what I thought, and I was afraid, frankly, that I would find out I didn't believe as much as I thought I should believe. And so I embarked on a process of reflection, writing what I called a personal theological essay. And the reaction I got all the time when I said to people, I'm embarked on a process of writing a personal theological essay, was, oh, I thought Jews didn't do theology. And I know that it was not just me who was getting that reaction, because I started reading a lot of books by scholars of contemporary Jewish theology, and almost all of them testified to this reaction, and they had to defend the fact that Jews, in fact, do theology, but we don't do it the way Christians do it. And here you encounter one of the truths about being a Jew in the United States of America in the 20th or the 21st century is that you're living in a country whose dominant culture is Christian. And so even when Jews hear the word theology, they associate it with the way Christians do it, which are beliefs about the nature of God. And Christians had to do it this way because they had this complicated thing called the Trinity, and they had to figure out the complicated relationship among the three persons of the Trinity. And as you know, if you know the history of Christianity, churches broke up and wars were fought and blood was spilled over this question of the relationship between God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Spirit. And Jews were Jews. We knew who we were. And as a community that was more than a religious community, but a people who hung together and sometimes were forced together by anti-Semitism, we didn't need to define our beliefs in the same way. And so there was a wide range of beliefs, commitments operating inside the Jewish people. And if you read our tradition from the Torah onwards, you find a multiplicity of voices. A multiplicity of voices talking about issues of God and faith, eternity, the big questions. So we tend not to do systematic theology. We don't do it the way that other people do. We don't have dogma and creed in the same way. And even if you might say the Jewish creed is the Shema Yisrael, read Jewish texts, look at Jewish tradition, and you find out we agree on what the Shema says, we disagree on what it means. Does echad mean one? Does it mean unique? What does one mean? So we're arguing over the interpretations, and that's Jewish. That's Jewish. So one of the ways that Jews do theology is by telling stories, like the ones the Torah does today. We do it also by doing law. Our law codes are a species of theology. Jews often do ethics. What other people do in terms of philosophy of ethics, we do in terms of Jewish law about the right way to behave, how to take care of one another, how to do justice, how to do compassion. Sometimes we do philosophy, and the minute you get a philosopher like Maimonides who tells you what the truth with a capital T is, you get 10 other philosophers to come along and say, no, it's not. He was wrong. And you probably know that some Jews actually burned the books of Maimonides because they thought he was heretical for various things he said about God and what we could know about God and not know about God. So what I want to do for the next few minutes is think with you theologically. Engage you in this process that I engaged in myself for the last few years, and ask yourself, well, what am I learning here? What do I believe here? And I'm not trying to say to you in the next 15 minutes what Judaism believes, certainly not what the truth with a capital T is, but I'm sharing with you the way the rabbis have done, the mystics, the philosophers, Jewish thinkers have done, one Jew with some knowledge of Jewish tradition and some commitment to Jewish people, the Jewish project, Jewish behavior, what one Jew has come to believe at this point in my life about these ultimate questions. So let's look at this parsha, and let me start at the beginning, like Rabbi Steinhardt did. Vayetze Yaakov, and Jacob went out. So immediately I noticed several things about this. Number one, the Torah is telling us a story about a human being. For us, he's a very significant human being. He's our ancestor, and his name is going to be changed, and we have that name too. So we are his children, the children of Israel. But this is not a story about God. It's not set up there in heaven telling us truths about the nature of ultimate reality. It's down below, which means that what it's about, what this particular theological essay is about, if I could call it that, is about a human being's experience of God, a human being's encounter with God, a moment when Jacob, to his great surprise, experiences the presence of God. So it's down here below where we are. It's not up above, as it were, where God is. And the second thing you notice about it is it happens when Jacob goes out. It doesn't happen when he's at home in his room. It happens at a moment of fear, a moment of trial. It happens on a journey. It happens when his defenses are down. It happens like this probably happened to you. Some of my most deep experiences in life have happened in moments when I'm vulnerable. Most of the time I have my armor up. I'm not open to new encounters. I'm not open to new experiences. I know what I think. I know what's real. And at those moments, I'm not going to encounter God. But the moments in my life, which have been most profoundly religious, if I could use that word, are the boundary moments, like the moment when I was in the delivery room when my daughter, our first child, was born, or the moments when I'm dealing with my parents' deaths, or moments of profound joy and moments of profound sadness. That's when I'm open to this kind of experiences, and that's when the Torah describes Jacob having an experience like this. Vayetze Yaakov, he went out of his normal routine, of his normal consciousness, his normal sense of what real is. And then he has this dream, and if you've read Freud, but you don't have to have read Freud, you know what Freud's going to say about this. Freud says that dreams are wish fulfillments. So Jacob is scared to death. He's running away from his brother Esau, who wants to kill him, and he doesn't know what's ahead of him. He hopes he's going to find a wife, but he doesn't know what's going on there. He knows he bears this inheritance, this burden of the covenant, which he got from his grandfather and his father, but he doesn't know what's going on. And so Freud would say, and does say, that a dream like this does not describe anything real in the world. This is what Jacob wants. So of course he has a dream, and he finds God, and God's going to protect him. What does God say to him in the dream? I'm going to watch over you. I'm going to be with you. Exactly what Jacob wants to hear. And I'm saying this to you now because as a person who has spent his life not only studying modern Jewish thought, but studying the modern challenges to faith, which come from Freud and from science and from Marx and from sociology and from anthropology, one of the things you gotta do to maintain your faith is stand up against a secular culture and say that some things might just be true despite the fact that I want them to be true. Despite the fact that what I most want in the world is to have God in my life and to know that I'm standing with God in this brief time I have on this little planet that circles an insignificant star in one of billions of galaxies in the known universe, despite all of that, the things that Jews testify to about life and goodness and kindness and community, these might be true. And Jacob has to have that defiance. He's got all sorts of things to challenge him. These are human challengers he's about to face, his cousin Laban, who I'm sure denies Jacob's experiences of God. He tells us Jacob is not going to be finding support. Support system does not exist for Jacob in the family he goes to in Haran. He has to flee them. And then, what does Jacob do? What I love about Jacob, and I think this is not coincidental, that the Torah makes him so profoundly human. It doesn't give us goody-goody ancestors who are having fairy godmother experiences of God. That's not what the Bible does. It gives us human beings we can recognize because it wants us to identify with them. It wants us to follow them. The Bible launches a project, the Jewish people's project of interacting with ourselves and other human beings and with God, and it wants us to sign on to this project. It wants us to write the next chapter of this story, and we can't do that if Jacob is an unbelievable ancestor who's so good and so virtuous and so perfect that there's no chance of us living up to him. So what does Jacob do the minute he recognizes that the Lord was in this place and I did not know? He does two things, remember? First, he builds an altar, and then he does the most human thing in the world. He tries to cut a deal with God. He tries to make a deal with God. This guy who presumably knows that he's the grandson of Abraham and the son of Isaac, and he knows that God has done amazing things with his ancestors, and he knows that God has also terrified his father and his grandfather. His father's name is, we call him Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Isaac, because Isaac is taken up there to Mount Moriah and might be sacrificed. This God is not an easy God. And Jacob tries to cut a deal and says, okay, God, you do this for me, you do that for me, you do the next thing for me, and you know what I'll do for you? I'll give you 10%. This guy who owns absolutely nothing, he owes absolutely everything to his family, to God. He wants to give God back 10%. And we laugh, and then I think the Torah knows we're going to laugh, and the Torah knows we're going to then have a second thought and say, how many of us actually give back 10%? How many of us actually give back 10%? The Mormons do. God bless the Mormons for this. They do tithe seriously. And Jews are known as givers of tzedakah. But how many of us actually give 10%? Right? 10% before taxes and 10% before day school, and right, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, Jacob's human. He's so one of us. He wants to make a deal with God. God, you do this for me, and I'll do that for you. And I can't tell you how many people, when I was chancellor, you may have had these discussions too. I was privileged to talk to people who would come up to me and say, you know, Chancellor Eisen, I used to believe in God, but I don't anymore. Because I prayed with all my heart that my mother would survive her bout with cancer, and God let me down and let her die, and I'm not going to speak to God again. I heard those stories so many times about people who were disappointed with God and so turned their backs. They tried to make a deal, and the sociologist Max Weber testifies that in every religion we know about, people try to make deals with God. Some people think of sacrifice that way. Some people think of ritual that way. I'll do this, God, I'll do the ritual correctly, and you've got to reward me by coming through for me when I most need it. So, not going to work. And we learn that it's not going to work from this story and many others in the Torah. That's a profound theological lesson for you as a Jew. It may be a negative lesson. You think you're going to have God in the palm of your hands so you can control God, and you think you're going to know if I say the blessings and I do the mitzvot, God's going to be there and take care of me. No, it's not going to work that way. And we know that because it didn't work that way for our ancestors and for the family members that we know about who suffered in life. And Jacob soon learns that having God with him does not mean an end to suffering. He suffers terribly. Look what Laban does for him. 20 years, he acquires 2 wives and lots of kids, but endless suffering, endless aggravation. And at the end of the Parsha, he confesses that he's afraid. This man Jacob lives a lot of his life in fear. He starts the Parsha in fear, he ends the Parsha in fear. So God is with him, but that doesn't mean the security not to be afraid. It doesn't mean an end to trial and tribulation. And this is also a profound theological lesson that Jews are learning about this God of ours, whoever this God is, and how to understand this God, which we try in various ways to understand God. But this God is not going to spare you from every trial and every suffering that there is. Doesn't mean an easy life. To have God with you does not mean easy life. It might be the contrary. And I'll say something that I don't think the Torah is teaching, but I think Jewish experience teaches. Probably everyone here has a theory of anti-Semitism. And in my personal notion of anti-Semitism, one of the reasons people don't like Jews is because they identify us in the Christian world and the Muslim world with God. The Jews are the people of God. And not everybody likes God all that much because God is not always a benevolent God. And God is conscience. God reminds you that you're not the person you should be. And if you believe that God is the agent of life and death in the world, then suffering and death are from God. And here's the Jews who are identified with God. I don't know if the Torah is teaching that lesson, but that's one of the lessons of Jewish history, certainly. To be a people whom Christians call the chosen people is also to be chosen for suffering. And one of the formative experiences for me, which I will never forget, which I'm sharing with you right now, is when I was doing my PhD at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I participated in an interfaith group that met in the Old City, and I got to be really close to a Catholic priest from Indiana, and we read the gospel together, and at one point he said to me, in love, he said this, Arnie, you Jews will never understand the Holocaust until you recognize that this is what it means to be the people of God, you're always going to be on the cross. And I knew that he said this in love, and I was furious. I do not think that that is the message of what it is to be a Jew in the world. And I think what the Torah does for us in giving us these stories of real human beings is show us that there are lows in their life, there are terrible moments, there are moments of fear and desperation, but there are also incredible highs. There are also incredible blessings. There's incredible joy and profundity and a good life. And it's all a package deal. And I guess life is such that you don't get one without the other. And that is also a theological lesson that the Torah teaches us. But notice it's a theological lesson not about the nature of God. It's a lesson about what it is to walk through life and have moments of encounter with God, fleeting moments, and have experiences of the divine in your life in various forms, and then to go on to the rest of your life, because life is more than religion. And religion is more than theology. So you find these theological lessons not in a chapter in the Torah called Angels, and not in a chapter called How God Does Justice. The Torah doesn't work that way. It tells stories which remind us of the way that we encounter God in the world. Well, let me just say one more thing about this character Jacob and how he becomes Israel in the next Parsha. One of the most beautiful, beautiful verses in the Torah is in the next Parsha, and it's a verse that marks a change in Jacob. To my mind, this marks the change from Jacob to Israel. The mark of Jacob as Israel is not only that he lives up to his name and he wrestles with God and men. And by the way, I would say that he wrestles with God and men, not just because God and men are two distinct species of being, but because sometimes malachim, Rabbi Applebaum correctly said, we don't imagine as these little nice things with wings on them. Human beings somehow bring God to us, bring God into our lives, and we have to wrestle with them. And Jacob wrestles, but I think he's Israel, not just because he wrestles with God and human beings, but because he knows that he's undeserving of the blessings that have come his way. That line where Jacob says, Katonti, I am too small, I am unworthy of all the gifts that you, God, have given me. So at the beginning of our Parsha, he's making a deal with God where he wants to give God back 10% for all that God gives him. And at the end of the next Parsha, he's already saying, thank you, I'm grateful. And the profound lesson of that Parsha theologically to me is, faith begins with gratitude. Faith begins with knowing that we're not owed anything. Nobody owed us life in the first place. Nobody owed us long life. Nobody owed us the ability to wake up in the morning and to wake up in the morning and be thankful and to know that you're blessed and know that being blessed is your responsibility to share that blessing. That is as much of a theological lesson, I think, as one can learn from our tradition. I happened to learn it from my dad at home, who had, as a teenager, been near death and had recovered, and thank God every day for life. But here you have Jacob, after all he goes through for 20 years in the house of Laban, about to come back and face his brother Esau, and he knows, finally, that he's unworthy of all his blessings. I think that's the way Jews do theology, and it's a model for all of us in these very hard times for the Jewish people and hard times for faith, for us to learn that the beginning of faith is gratitude. Shabbat Shalom.